Hello everyone, thanks for tuning into today's first video. We're doing the spring forecast. Today's first video at Gazworthy's, but a big day coming up, loads of updates. Because we're going to do a spring forecast right now. That's what we're starting off with. And after that, the spring, or the long-range bandwagon is going to be rolling on to summer. So later on this afternoon, we'll have a sneak peek at summer 2017. So that's where we'll move on to with the long-range then. And in between that video and this, there's going to be the Gazworthy's Sunday Roundup as well. That'll be with you around lunchtime. So lots of updates coming up today, and I hope you enjoy them. But as I said, we're starting off with the spring forecast. Now, because of the way the calendar's worked out, we're having to combine the spring forecast with the season model roundup, the last one of those. So we're going to get around 11 long-range models together, see what they're all showing. Then we'll recap on the analogues we've been looking at for the spring, and then we'll deliver the spring forecast. So I'll get on with that for you in a second. Before I get on with that, just say about the ads. There's links to articles on all of the pages. Have a browse, which is a click through links. You're going to help us page website. Thanks very much for doing that. It's also video ads to most pages, which own content where you'll watch and make comments up again, and it does help to pay the Gazworthy's.com. So big thanks to everybody getting involved, and thank you for doing that. Just say that the links to these long-range models can be found, most of them anyway, can be found on the links page. Not all there, but most of them are there at the Gazworthy's links page. And just say enjoy the video. It's going to be quite a long video, so you can't watch it all in one go. Don't worry, you can come back to the website, watch it whenever you want, because this video will be placed on the spring updates and forecast page later on today with a written post that goes with it. So you'll be able to see the video whenever you want it or whenever you need it. And just say I hope you enjoy the video. Right, let's get on with the model part of the forecast first. But we're going to start off with the Russian model, and we're starting off with temperature probability for the Russian model. By the way, all the models that we look at for this final update are going to be covering the full spring period, so this one goes from March to May 2017, as does all the other models as well. There's none of this messing around with missing months or anything. So last month, for example, we was covering, with 2 or 3 of these models, covering February to April. Not so for this one, we're covering the full spring period. So the temperature anomaly, or temperature probability, is coming out average with the Russian model for this spring, which is quite different to what it normally shows. Normally it shows above average temperature, so it is a little bit cooler actually this month with its forecast for the spring. The precipitation anomaly is coming out close to average, but probably hinting, if anything, on a little bit on the drier than average side. So a fairly average signal for temperature and fairly average to a little bit drier than average for precipitation. That starts us off with the Russian model. APEC next, and this is a collaboration of various Met agencies. I think the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia is in with this, as is the JMA, but the main driving force behind this model is the South Korean Met Agency. So this is 500 millibar height anomaly for the spring. It's placing a trough out to the west, and it will be bringing the flow in rather like that. It looks like a fairly unsettled signal for this spring. Temperature anomalies are coming out very significantly milder than average, warmer than average temperature anomalies for the spring. And precipitation, because that trough is centered over and just to the west of the country, the precipitation anomaly is actually coming out above average as well. So APEC is seeing a wet but warm spring coming up. JMA next, Japanese Meteorological Agency. Now, we can get a lot of information from this model. I'm not going to have time to show you all of that for this forecast and this update video. But if you want to break this down on a month-by-month basis, we've already done that actually in a video earlier in the month. So you can find it on Gazworthy's catch-up page, and you can just sort of recap on what the model is showing on a month-by-month basis. What we're going to do for this video is have a look at the 3 monthly anomalies. So we're going to start off with the 500 millibar height anomaly for the spring, and we're placing a trough of low pressure around the western part of Europe, which looks like it should be an unsettled signal. Indeed it is. The temperature anomaly for this spring is coming out milder. I should say precipitation anomaly is coming out wetter than average. And the precipitation anomaly is coming out warmer than average as well. So a mild but a wet spring is being signalled by the JMA. If you have a look at the mean wind flow, it's hard to make these charts out, but essentially it's indicative of a trough right over the country with northeasterlies to our north and west and southerly or southwesterlies just to our east. So variable winds, but generally overall it is quite a wet and quite a mild signal for this spring. There's a lot of intra-month variation for this spring though with the JMA. So for March, it looks really, really unsettled, and then the pattern does change. But I'll let you have a look at that JMA video that looks at it month by month on the catch-up page. Just haven't got time to go through all of those charts for this update. So we can move on to the Brazilian model next. This is the 500 millibar height anomaly from the Brazilian model. We're doing the Americas, of course, next. So we're starting in South America and we'll be working our way north. This always does it a little bit different. This 500 millibar height anomaly, I think they tried to catch us out because on these charts, blue is extrapolating to above average heights, which is high pressure, and yellows, oranges and reds is extrapolating to below average heights, which is low pressure, and normally any other 500 millibar height anomaly that I'm aware of does it the other way round. So I think they try and catch us out. But this one looks rather different to what we've seen so far, actually, because this is extending quite a big area of above average heights through the UK and into many parts of Central and Western Europe as well, which looks like it should be quite a dry and potentially fairly warm signal as well, because you would have thought that the jet stream is probably going to the north of the country, so we're on the warm side of the jet. Let's have a look at the temperature anomaly, and that is coming out above average, a milder than average spring being predicted there by the Brazilian model. And what about rainfall? It's close to average, but if anything, I think we are hinting at being a little bit drier than average in the western part of Europe, which isn't surprising because there's an area of above average heights extending through from the Atlantic into Europe. So that looks like a fairly pleasant spring. Actually, it would be pretty warm and fairly dry as well. CANSIPS is next. This is the mean sea level pressure anomaly from the CANSIPS model. This is from the website tropicaltidbits.com. You can find a link to Tropical Tidbits on the links page. And we're back to the unsettled signal that we was looking at through the models up to the Brazilian. So this one is placing a trough or an area of low pressure. It's a mean sea level pressure anomaly, placing an area of low pressure over the UK, essentially. The temperature anomaly is coming out milder than average, a warmer than average spring there through most parts of Northern Europe, but I suspect it'll be unsettled. Indeed it is. The precipitation anomaly coming out wetter than average from CANSIPS. So from Brazil to Canada, let's go down into America, and we're going to look at the analogues from Patal-Peng next. Now, you remember Hugo van der Doel used to do the analogues based on the sea surface temperature anomalies. Hugo, as I told you at the end of last year, Hugo has retired now, and it's been taken over by Patal-Peng. They've sort of refreshed the charts and changed the colour scheme and changed the way we look at them a little bit. So they look a bit different compared to what we're used to. Maybe a little bit easier to interpret, but I don't want to say that. I don't want to say anything against Hugo van der Doel. But what we see here, this is the 200 millibar height anomaly, by the way. So it used to be 500 millibar heights, but Patal-Peng is looking at 200 millibar heights. This is the forecast for the spring based on the sea surface temperature anomalies across the world in January last month. And then looking at other years that had similar sea surface temperature anomalies and creating a forecast going forward. So the 200 millibar height anomaly is placing a trough out to the west with the flow probably coming up something like that. I've got quite a lot of red to the north, which is northern blocking going on up here. Quite a bit of high pressure there, but it's all lined up wrong to deliver us cold weather. Actually, that looks quite a mild and unsettled signal for the spring. Let's have a look at the temperature anomaly We in British Isles coming out close to average, but many western parts of Europe actually coming out warmer than average for this spring. So quite a mild scene, I think, for most parts of northern and central western Europe overall, albeit the British Isles actually close to average. The precipitation anomaly looks a bit wetter than average for England and Wales, and a bit drier than average for Scotland. So quite a complicated sort of pattern there to make out, but I think overall the upshot is fairly unsettled and quite mild from Patal Peng. Next we go through to NASA. This is the experimental NASA model, and 500 middle heights, placing a ridge out to west. There's probably some sort of trough going through here, with jet stream doing something like that. We've also got a ridge though over here quite strongly, and that could be drawing up fairly warm southerly winds across central parts of Europe. Let's have a look at temperature anomaly. Above average temperatures again. This is a very strong signal for this final update. Many of these long-range models going for warm and average temperature anomalies. The NASA model is doing that also. What about precipitation? And that is coming out average, possibly hinting at being a little bit on the wetter side. Notice some parts of Scandinavia coming out a little bit wetter than average. To the north of Scotland, coming out a little bit wetter than average as well. So it's near normal to slightly above average with rainfall, and in terms of temperatures, it's very significantly milder than average. CFS-V2 next, and this is 700 millibar height anomaly for the spring. We've got a trough out to our west. We're bringing the flow in like that. You would expect quite an unsettled spring if that is correct. Temperature anomalies, look at this, very significantly milder than average there. And the precipitation anomaly, that is looking slightly on the wetter side again, which isn't a surprise because there's low pressure out here with the jet stream coming through. You'd expect quite an unsettled signal for Central Western Europe. That's what the model is hinting at. So I think overall the trend of these models, there is a little bit of difference between them, but overall trend so far is warmer than average temperatures, and if anything a bit on the unsettled side. Jamstec IOD next. This is for temperature anomaly for the spring. Again, many parts of Europe, British Isles included, coming out with a warmer than average spring. What about precipitation? And a bit of an east-west split for eastern parts. It's a bit drier than average. To the north and west, it's a bit wetter than average. I would suspect overall we are slightly more on the unsettled side again, with warmer than average temperatures. Next model we're going to look at is Bayesian Climate Centre, penultimately for the models as well. This one, 500 millibar heights, placing a ridge close to and through the country. So that looks a fairly dry signal for the spring. Temperature anomalies, such a strong signal. Haven't had a single model yet going for colder than average. So the temperature anomaly for the Bayesian Climate Centre for this spring comes out milder than average. But precipitation anomaly, this one is close to what the Brazilian model is doing, comes out quite significantly drier than average. So a very pleasant spring from the Bayesian Climate Centre, mostly warm but quite dry. And then finally, our very own UK Met Office GLOW-C5 model, mean sea level pressure anomaly, is placing low pressure around many parts of the UK and Europe as well. The jet stream is coming through the country and into Europe rather like that. The temperature anomaly looks slightly milder than average. Most parts of Europe looking very mild. The British Isles is closer to average for this spring. And in terms of the precipitation anomaly, that is coming out wetter than average, which isn't a surprise because there's low pressure around the UK and extending into Europe as well, so you'd expect quite a wet spring from that. So the overall signal from these long-range models, none of them, there is a single one that's going colder than average. They are all going for either average above average temperatures, and most of them, vast majority, is above average to significantly above average. So that's a really strong signal. And I think also most of these models are on the wetter side as well. Now, just a very quick recap on the analogues before I do the spring forecast. So, earlier in the season, we looked at springs that were moving into ENSO neutral. So, they're ENSO neutral springs, but with a particular focus. We tried to have a particular focus on springs that were coming out of a weak La Nina type situation going into ENSO neutral. There weren't all that many of them that were doing that. So it looks like a very unsettled pattern for the spring when we have ENSO neutral, particularly following a weak La Nina. There's a trough generally anomalously centred around the west of Europe. There are hints of a little bit of northern blocking as well. One or two of those springs were coming out cold, but there wasn't a strong signal for the springs to be cold, to be honest. But it does look a very unsettled signal with these ENSO neutral springs. And then just last week, we attempted to create some analogues based on the winter pattern. Now, the pattern that we had during winter of 2016, 2017 has been very, very unusual. It's been a mild and dry spring. Winter, I should say, for the British Isles, which is quite unusual. Normally, if it's mild, it's wet in the winter, and if it's dry, it's cold. So we established that the pattern we've had this winter has been really quite unusual. And there weren't many years that we could go at, but we did come up with one winter that was mild and dry, and that was the winter of 1931-1932. And so the analogue for the spring of 1932 came out like this. Looks like quite a cold signal. And also quite an unsettled signal as well, with low pressure through the country. But because it's only 1 year, not really enough to be going at. And certainly not enough to be pinning all our hopes on. So it does mean that it's a very complicated and difficult season to forecast this spring. I think we can see between the analogues, though, and the models, we'd like to have quite an unsettled spring. So we've had a very dry winter. We are already seeing signs, I think, that March could be a significantly more unsettled month. And I suspect overall we might well have an unsettled spring. So rainfall anomalies, I think, could come out above average. And maybe substantially so, especially in the earlier part of the spring, perhaps, maybe transitioning something a little bit drier than average later. But I'm going to go for above average rainfall for this spring, quite an unsettled spring for the UK and Ireland. In terms of the temperature anomaly, I think we're going to have to go above average, because that's such a strong signal from those models that, to me, it just appears to be an overwhelming signal really for milder than average temperatures. So mild and quite unsettled, I think, is going to be the setup for this spring. That doesn't preclude colder snaps, though. And I think particularly at some point through March, maybe early April, we might get a colder interlude, maybe lasting a week or so. That could be quite substantially cold, actually. But I don't think it'll last all that long. I think overall, the pattern for this spring probably going to be quite mild, but quite unsettled. So that's the best I can come up with. Another really difficult season to forecast. The seasons, long-range seasonal forecasts seem to be getting harder as we're coming along, having really very unusual weather patterns. So, finally, in the final analysis, to recap, the GavsWeatherVids.com Spring 2017 forecast is for above average temperatures, a mild and average spring, but with a chance of a quite significantly colder interlude at some point, probably March, early April for that. But temperatures overall mild and average. Precipitation probably above average, which is quite a change on the winter, which overall was pretty dry. We'll see how it goes, as ever we'll evaluate when we get to summer. We always evaluate our long-range forecast here at Gavs Weather Vids, so we will be doing an evaluation for this forecast when we get to summer. And talking of summer, we have got the sneak peek for the summer of 2017 coming up this afternoon. But before that, around lunchtime, we're going to have the Gavs Weather Vids Sunday Roundup. So come back for all of the updates, and that's all for now. Thanks for watching.